Yuriko the Tiger's Shadow currently sits on a 21.81% average win rate from 79 different decks that have entered into cEDH tournaments. To put that into some perspective, Corvold is sitting on 14.66, the Gitrog monster on only 18 decks though is on 12.51, Ataraxa on 84 decks is sitting on 23.67 win percentage, and Niv Mizzet is sitting on 22.27, and Nayela is sitting on 22.54 from 197 different decks. This data was collected from this web page, link in the description below of the video. Here you have all the different Yuriko decks that have entered into various tournaments that you can see here just above my head. And what we did was basically add together all the wins, every single win here, in a big grand value, and then divide that by the total number. So by adding in all these numbers here together, you would take the win versus the total, and that gives us this result. Previously in these statistics videos, I've been looking at these values you see right here, but in this case we have moved away from those, and now we're only looking at the win, loss and draw ratio. But we can go deeper and look at individual cards like this one, Contagion. A 5 seems the instant. It is the black version of Force of Will. Every single color got a similar version to a Force of Will. The pie chart here indicates the inclusion rate, how many decks did include it. You have the average win rate just above my head, that is the all Yuriko decks calculated together, like I showcased in the beginning of the video. But then up here we have a different value. We have win rate, and this time 22.04, which is tiny bit better than the average. That win rate is calculated from decks only, or well, not only containing Contagion, but decks that are including Contagion. We have basically excluded every single deck from the calculation that haven't included Contagion. So in this case we're getting two different groups. One group where we're calculating the average win rate from all decks, and one group where we're only looking at decks that did include Contagion. And here you can see that I'm actually gonna say that it's pretty much the same win rate, even though it's a difference by 0.2. But we do have some cards that are like going a little bit more further. For example, Blue Elemental Blast, a really low inclusion rate, but a pretty good win rate. The indication could be that Blue Elemental Blast could be a good card to consider. And that's what we are trying to do in this video. We are trying to analyze Yuriko's win rate statistics from tournaments and see what cards could potentially be good. However, statistics isn't always trustworthy. For example here, Razaketh the Full-Blooded. Now you have an inclusion rate of 3.8% and 3 decks that actually included Razaketh that entered into tournaments. And here we have a lower average win rate compared to the total average of all Yuriko decks, so the indication could be that Razaketh might be a bad card. However, the inclusion rate is so low that we can't really tell much from it. Also, looking at the p-value, now I am not going to explain p-value inside this video, but if the p-value is not showcasing a significant statistical result, I'm gonna say that, and in this case it aren't. To make it super short, the p-value is saying that the win rate can't be trusted. Super short explanation. Now that you have been orientated about what's going on, let's take a look at some cards. This is a correct p-value. The lower the better, just in short explanation again. So this is a trustworthy p-value. Scroll Rack is a very popular card among Yuriko decks, and here you can see that it has a 50-50 split. The big trick is that you use it to put your Emrakul or your really expensive spells on top of your library, and then you flip into those really expensive spells with Yuriko to deal lots and lots of burning damage. But as you can see here, Including Scrolleriac in your deck might be a bad idea, because you're getting an average win rate of 17.22 when you are including it compared to when you don't include it. Treasure Cruise is another typical Yuriko card that is very expensive, but can be paid by just delving away your graveyard. Yuriko is really good at increasing the graveyard count, and she enjoys really expensive spells she doesn't need to pay the mana for. However, as you can see here, including it, it has a very low inclusion rate. By the way, a very low inclusion rate is also an indicator that the card might not be good. People have been playtesting with it and realized it's not good and therefore cutting it from their deck. And when you include Treasure Cruise in this case, the 11 decks that did it, they received a worse win rate compared to the average. Submerge, another example of a really expensive spell that Yuriko don't need to pay mana for, also comes with, it's actually rather close. The big reason why I personally think it's getting a bad win rate is because the forest count isn't really secured anymore. For this to become cheap, no mana spent whatsoever, you need an opponent that controls a forest, and that's not really guaranteed. Temporal Mastery, the miracle extra turn spell, has a really expensive mana cost of 7. However, if you miracle it, you only pay 2. And it's getting, I'm gonna say that it has something of the same as the average here. And I can actually see that. I mean, if you actually top deck this thing, it's an extra turn for just 2 mana. And extra turns in Yuriko could be actually kinda good. Another thing you need inside Yuriko besides expensive spells are very cheap 1 CMC creatures that you can get Yuriko into play quickly and efficiently with. This card actually received a very strong win rate, but a very low inclusion rate. Also, the p-value is indicating that we can't trust the win rate statistics on this one. So the final wording is that this could showcase some potential, but you can't trust the win rate that you're seeing on the screen right now. It's a card to showcase and to consider, but it's not guaranteed that this is a great card for Yuriko. There might be better versions than this thing. This is another candidate also, too few sample size to actually say anything. A big takeaway, I believe, is that it doesn't really matter what kinds of 1 CMC 1/1s that you're actually including. The question we should try to answer is the ratio. How many of these 1 mana cost 1/1 flying creatures are we gonna play? Some of them, like Gingerbread, could showcase a bad win rate result, but in this case I wouldn't trust it. It could be luck and player skill having an impact in the game as well. Because the difference between something like Gingerbread and this Mistcloak Herald, I mean, they are very similar. I don't think that part is going to affect it that much. There are definitely cards that could be potentially better, but they're all more or less doing something of the same thing, making your Yuriko come into play turn 2 consistently. And all of these 1 CMC 1/1 flying creatures will more or less achieve that. The next step is interaction. Yuriko naturally becomes an interactive mid-range control commander because of her effective card draw. Crippling Fear, I would actually say that this is a pretty good win rate. It is close to the average win rate of what Yuriko have, very close. I really want to showcase this card, Chains of Mistopheles. Now it's a very expensive card, so the inclusion rate is very low just because of that reason. However, I think this card should be played more, because Yuriko's card draw is actually not a real card draw. It is going past Chains of Mistopheles. This means that Yuriko is breaking parity against that card. Now the inclusion rate is extremely low, so we can't really say if this is actually working out or not. However, I think more Yuriko decks should start to actually play it, because it is actually a pretty good anti card draw card that you aren't affected by. Curse Totem is another example of a cool card you could actually consider. Now Yuriko don't naturally want a board wipe except with Crippling Fear, because Crippling Fear aren't killing all your ninjas. But you don't want to board wipe away your creature board state, but sometimes you want to interact with your opponent's creature board state. Curse Totem is a good option here. Yuriko can actually go further into... Okay, can and can. Yeah, she can. I mean, Chains of Mephistopheliss, Curse Totem, we might as well just showcase more. Now the inclusion rate is really low, once again. But Yuriko doesn't have to play a storm game plan. She functions pretty okay, or well, you saw her average win rate compared to other commanders' average win rate, so you make your own decision whether how good the stax mid-range Yuriko game plan works in general. But here you have it. Dampening Sphere is showcasing a potential. Now Dampening Sphere is actually a great stax card in the current meta, and Yuriko could benefit from a longer game, so to say. Curtain's Call is an instant with Undoubted, which means you're gonna pay 3 mana instead of 6 mana for this thing, but when you flip into it with your Yuriko, it's gonna burn for 6. Deadly Rollick, I'm a little bit surprised. I thought this was gonna be like an auto-include, because you're usually gonna have your commander in play. It is really hard to prevent Yuriko from being on the board, and you don't pay any mana whatsoever for this, and it flips into a 4 damage burn. So yeah, I can see people not including it, but I thought it would be more. Commandeer is another cool example. It's a upgraded Force of Will, you could say. Now Yuriko naturally normally have a 7 card hand size, usually discarding to hand size 2. However, with Commandeer, instead of paying the 7 mana, you can exile 2 blue cards from your hand, basically going down to 4 cards to cast this gain control of target non-creature spell. You may choose new targets for it. Doomsday seems to be a good combo option for Yuriko. If it resolves, you're gonna either perform a Yuriko burn flip win by simply attacking with your ninjas, getting a bunch of triggers, and basically stacking the top of your library with your most expensive cards, and do something like 30 or I don't know how much damage you can actually stack up eventually, but you can do a lot of damage with this thing, depending on how many Yuriko triggers you actually get. Or if you don't actually have Yuriko going for you, you could just put Thassa's Oracle package in there and win a more traditional cEDH way. Grafdigger's Cage is currently considered to be one of the best stax cards. I think there's like a discussion, Rule of Law or Grafdigger's Cage. I don't really care. It's a good stax card currently, and it's showcasing a form of result. Imposter Mech, very low inclusion rate, but it's also showcasing some form of performance. Currently sitting on a 28.17 win rate from 5 different decks. Karn the Great Creator is showcasing a 17.78% win rate from 3 decks only, and with that very low inclusion rate, we can't trust the values. The p-value is indicating that as well, saying that the win rate is not secured result basically. However, I'm actually gonna trust the statistics here. I believe that that win rate should be correct, even though if the sample size was larger, because Karn the Great Creator is really expensive. Yuriko can't really pay for that. Yuriko's mana production is usually very low, so she needs these free to cast spells to actually function. Also, second, she can't really protect it. You're better off just playing Null Rod, actually. Some people have actually been playing Yule Lotus, not that many. 3 decks, an inclusion rate of 3.8, but a win rate of 25. However, the p-value from this is obviously showcasing that we can't trust the result. The inclusion rate is just too small. But it's showcasing that maybe having Yule Lotus, sometimes, I mean, Yuriko's gonna get killed and you don't have things to bounce back to your hand to ninja her into play, then Yule Lotus is a option, you could say. Mana Vault is sitting on a 16.67% win rate, extremely low inclusion rate, 3 decks only played it, and the p-value is saying that we can't trust the statistics. But once again, I'm actually going to personally believe the numbers we're seeing here. I don't think that Mana Vault is a good fit for Yuriko in general. Yuriko isn't really a commander that can utilize Mana Vault compared to other commanders. I find this one entertaining. Mana Crypt, currently sitting on a 19.56% win rate. However, the inclusion rate is not 100%. First of all, that could be because of budget reasons, but I can actually see why too. You see, Yuriko don't naturally play these colorless artifacts in general because she can't really utilize the mana. Either everything she's casting is for free, 1 or 2, or she just can't pay it for it whatsoever anyways. So I have a feeling that some people might actually view Mana Crypt as something that doesn't benefit much to the Yuriko game plan in general. However, personally, I would still play it. Mox Diamond, 19.11% win rate, and not a 100% inclusion rate. 59 decks out of 79 actually played it, so you have an inclusion rate about 75%. Personally, however, I would auto-include Mox Diamond inside Yuriko because Yuriko isn't suffering from a excess of amounts of cards in her hand. She's usually having a problem with having too many cards in her hand, in my personal play testing experience. And having access to more mana is actually quite good, especially colored mana, because Yuriko usually play a lot of 1 CMC interactive spells like Flusterstorm, Anouther You Can't Refuse, Swan Song, etc. So she needs small pips of blue and black mana here and there. Let's move forward and look into ninjas. You see, it's been something of a development. When Yuriko first came, it was more a little bit focused towards turbo. That was the expression I was getting from most of the Yuriko decks I ran into and played myself. But over time, a ninja tribal, or I'm not gonna say ninja tribal, but including a few ninjas have actually started to increase. Here we have Silver Fear Master for ninjutsu, blue and a black, a 2/2. Ninjutsu abilities you activate cost 1 less to activate. Other ninjas and rogue creatures you control get +1/+1. And it has a 60% inclusion rate and a 21.12 average win rate. So it seems to be doing some good. Universal Automaton, 1 colorless mana, 1/1 changeling, average win rate 20.41. It has a something of 90% inclusion rate, and it is both a trick to get your Yuriko into play early in the game, but also a ninja itself. It has changeling. This card is every creature type, so it is going to trigger Yuriko triggers when this thing punches people's face. Silent Blade Uni. This is a 7 mana ninja with ninjutsu, black, blue and 4, which means it's 6 mana for this thing. Now the inclusion rate is extremely low, only 2 decks out of 79, and it has a 25% average win rate, and obviously the p-value is saying that this is not trustworthy statistics. But I would like to showcase it anyways. I mean, apparently some decks have taken it to tournaments, and apparently some decks have won with it. Now some decks and a very few decks don't merit and showcase that the card is working out, but hey, it's cool, right? Prosperous Thief, 3 mana, human, ninja, ninjutsu, 1 generic and 1 blue, a grand total of only 2 mana. Whenever 1 or more ninja or rogue creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, create a treasure token. This is great! This is generating mana for you, something Yuriko actually needs. If you connect at several different opponents, you get more triggers, so the maximum count of treasures you could potentially make here is 3. It has an average win rate of 19.78, and an average inclusion rate somewhere around 92%. So a lot of decks are actually playing it, and it's showcasing somewhat of a good result. Skull Snatcher. This is a really bad card in general, but when you're going Ninja Tribal, it is something to consider. However, it's not showcasing a good result. It has ninjutsu 1 black, so that's good. It's easy to get this into play, but it doesn't really do anything. When Skull Snatcher deals combat damage to a player, remove up to 2 target cards in that player's graveyard from the game. Now that's not nothing, it's interacting with an opponent's Underworld Breach, it's a 2-1, so yeah. But it has a very high inclusion rate, basically a little bit more than 50%, 58%, but the average win rate is lower than the grand total average. 17.24% average win rate for Skull Snatcher. Moon Circuit Hacker. I've actually gotten a comment from someone that is watching these videos driving a car and can't look at the video visuality, so I'm reading most of the information out loud here. Ninjutsu 1 blue mana, very high inclusion rate around 74% and an average win rate of 21.61, so it's showcasing a pretty good result actually. But what about making everything into ninja? Arcane Adaptation, a blue enchantment. As Arcane Adaptation enters the battlefield, shows a creature type, and basically here you make all your creatures into ninjas, and that's pretty good if you want to kill your opponents with Yuriko flip triggers. It doesn't have a very high inclusion rate, very low inclusion rate. Only 4 decks out of 79 have included it, and they have a grand total average win rate of 0 altogether, which means that it isn't really showcasing a good performance. I can't pronounce that card, but something ninja infiltrator, ninjutsu blue and black, so it has a pretty low ninjutsu cost. Whenever a ninja you control deal combat damage to a player, draw a card. Pretty high inclusion rate, 74 decks out of 79 actually played it, so it has something of a 95% inclusion rate and an average win rate of 19.58. Sakashima's Student, Ninjutsu 2, 1 blue, 1 generic, a total of 2 mana. You may have Sakashima's Student enters at the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the battlefield, except it is a ninja, in addition to its other creature types. Very high inclusion rate, basically 95 decks have included it, but an average win rate of 19.63. So I actually think that it's very close to the average. It is showcasing a form of potential. Or it's not showcasing a terrible result. Or it's not showcasing a terrible result compared to the average result of Yuriko in general. Let's move forward and look at some cards with statistics that stand out a tiny bit. So Scheming Symmetry, 1 black mana, sorcery, choose 2 target players like yourself and an opponent. Each of them search their library for a card, then shuffle their library and put that card on top of it. So this is a very bad Imperial Seal group hug card. However, I mean, it doesn't always matter if you're giving away a tutor for one of your opponent if you're gonna win the game yourself. Now it has a very low inclusion rate, only 10% have actually played it, 8 decks out of 79, but they are showcasing a form of performance. Maybe just having lots of tutors might be a good thing. Or well, in this Yuriko case, having top deck tutors might be a good thing, because you actually don't need to cost whatever you put on top of your library. If it's really expensive and Yuriko connects, then good for you. You might have won the game from that. This card actually surprised me a lot. It is Windcaller Aven, 6 mana for a 4/3 bird wizard that is common, flying, and cycling 1 blue mana. When you cycle this thing, target creature gains flying until end of turn. This is good when you wanna get through with your Yuriko and punch on one that has blockers but don't have creatures with flying. Now it has an inclusion rate of about 12% and an average win rate of 32.50. Now it's a little bit too few decks to actually say that this is secured safe win rate, I would personally say, but still it is showcasing a potential. Like 1 blue mana, make your Yuriko go through and draw a card, which actually means you're drawing 2 cards from the 1 blue mana, because this is securing that you're getting a connect with your Yuriko. Mystic Remora, we all know what Mystic Remora does, it's doing great things. This is something of an auto include, usually have a 100% inclusion rate whenever I look at it inside various commanders, regardless of commanders. However, this time it has a 78% inclusion rate. All decks aren't playing it. Well, there are some people out there that I actually haven't realized that it's good, potentially. People might play weird decks and strange IDs, so there might be some corner cases of strange players that don't include it. But a 78% inclusion rate is still really low for a Mystic Remora. However, I actually think it makes sense. Now look at the win rate, 18.10%, which is something lower than the average. It's not a huge step, but it's showcasing a underperformance compared to the average. And I think I can see why. You see, Yuriko really wanna go to combat. She wanna be proactive and deal that damage to your opponent's face, because sometimes that's your actual win con in this ninja burn play. However, Mystic Remora puts you on a different game plan, a more control game plan, which isn't wrong either, so it kinda fits. But sitting there and basically paying for the cumulative upkeep cost all turn forever is not really the flow of how Yuriko wanna play. And Yuriko is a very consistent deck. You always have a Yuriko turn to attack and trigger, because you have just constructed your deck to always be able to mulligan for that turn 1/1/1 flying creature. And Mystic Remora doesn't fit into that game plan, and you still have it very consistent game plan with Yuriko. So I can see a world where people aren't actually including the fish. Gilded Drake is showcasing a very terrible performance. It has a very low inclusion rate of only 11.4% and an average win rate of 10.56, so that's not good. I've actually seen this kind of result from other various commanders. Currently, Gilded Drake doesn't seem to perform that great in general. Most commanders that I've looked at have an average win rate on Gilded Drake that is lower compared to their personal commander average. Counterbalance. Now, I don't personally like Counterbalance. I think it's overrated. I know a lot of people think it's a great card, and I'm not gonna say that it's bad, but I don't think it's great. Here you have statistics. 13 decks actually included it. It has something around 16% inclusion rate and an average win rate of 18.27%. So it's not showcasing a fantastic performance. Now, I actually think it's a very bad card inside Yuriko, because Yuriko's average CMC varies a lot. Counterbalance is great when most of your cards are either 0, 1, 2 and maybe 3 to the maximum, because that's the most common average CMC people are casting. Underworld Breach, Cycrift, Phasas, Dockside, etc. are all on 2. But Yuriko decks containing cards with 6, 5, 7, 9, 13 mana cost, it just doesn't really work that great with Counterbalance. Yingitaxis Core Augur, the first Yingitaxis for 10 mana. So if you flip into this, that's 10 loss of life for all of your free opponents. However, it has a very low inclusion rate, only 4 decks have played it, have an average win rate of 13.39, so it's not performing good. I don't personally think this card is good. I actually think it's bad. It is something of a stax card, removing your opponent's hand size. However, well, you're also drawing 7 cards at the end step, but it's just so extremely expensive. I don't think you should play this inside Yuriko. Emrakul, on the other hand, 13 CMC, the promised end. Now, depending on how you've built it, there is actually a small chance that you eventually cast this big thing, because you're just reducing the casting cost by having multiple different card types in your graveyard. However, it has a very low inclusion rate, about 7.6%, But the average win rate is actually, I'm gonna say, the same as the average win rate in general, but a tiny bit better. It is showcasing a positive potential performance. But we can go higher into more CMC that we're never casting. Draco! 16 mana! Draco costs 2 less to play for each basic land type among lands you control, so that's something. But it's a 9/9 flying and that's it. We're only playing this because of the 16 CMC mana cost here to make good Yuriko burn trigger effect by being lucky. It has an 11% inclusion rate, average win rate of 21.30, so it's doing something potentially good. But I don't know, I think you have a better chance playing Emrakul, the Promised End, because that is actually doing something inside this format if you actually okay, actually, if you resolve an Emrakul, the Promised End, you're in a good spot. However, also, on the cast, like casting Emrakul, the Promised End, that is a very good effect. Stealing someone's turn is huge in this format. Now it is expensive, you're normally paying like 7 or 8 mana for this, but sometimes you actually get there. Covert Tactician, Ninjutsu, 1 blue, 1 generic for a 2/4 human ninja. When Covert Tactician deals combat damage to a player, you may put an artifact card with mana value less than or equal to that damage from your hand onto the battlefield. This is like mana production, but it demands that you actually have artifacts in your hand, and Yuriko doesn't play that many 2 CMC and 1 CMC artifacts. But it's a good showcase. It has a 30% inclusion rate and an average win rate of 23.73, so it is better than the average actually. But if we quickly jump over to Arcane Signet, it has an inclusion rate about 9% and an average win rate of 11.22, so very few decks are actually playing artifacts that tap for mana. Dig Through Time, 18.05% win rate. Delve, so you can pay basically as 2 blue mana for it, but still an average win rate, it's basically a 50-50 split, and it's still, okay, it has something of a very close average win rate, but it's still lower than the average. March of the Swirling Mist has a 50-50 split, half of all the decks have actually included it. It has a 22.73% win rate. Torpor Orb, because currently a pretty good stax card. I mean, if you're not actually going for Fastest Oracle yourself, because you don't have to, because you're basically trying to play that mid-range controlled burn Yuriko, then Torpor Orb is currently a great stax effect against close to all opponents, I think. Well, it has an average inclusion rate about 14% and an average win rate of 25.10%. So it's showcasing a kind of small performance that is looking pretty good. Now let's take a look at an Yuriko decklist by Mad Cat something. We have Changeling Outcast, Ornithopter, Phyrexian Walker, I like that, Mouthdust Changeling. We have a bunch of various ninjas here and a whole bunch of various... What is this? Okay, I was gonna say a whole bunch of various sheep mana cost creatures. We do have that. Tetsuo Omisu... Can't pronounce that one. You know what I'm trying to say. Now what is this? Oh yeah, it's that modern creature. If your life total is less than your starting life total, this spell costs X less to cast, where X is the difference. This is actually pretty easy to cast inside cEDH when I think about it, because your life total starts at 40, it easily diminishes. Now it is a 15 CMC spell, a 7/7, that's it. But yeah, you're playing this basically for the Yuriko burns. Street Rate, this is a 5 CMC card, pay 2 life, draw card, cycling. It's a good card inside Doomsday, but it's also like a cantrip that just increases the CMC ratio inside Yuriko in general. Temporal Mastery, Temporal Trespass, Doomsday, Crippling Fear, Enter the Infinite, and Seagate Restoration. I think this is an auto-include for Yuriko, just because the fact that this is normally a Blue land you pay 3 life for, but if you flip into it, that's 7 life loss for your opponents. Academ's Awakening is basically the same thing, but 3 life instead. Blinkmoth Infusion. This is affinity for artifact. Untap all artifacts. It has 14 mana or 2 blue mana. Misdirection, Tainted Pact. Yeah, we were playing Thassa's Oracle, so we're both going for a mixture of like typical Dimir. We are not playing Adnos obviously, but we're playing a very typical Dimir Thassa's package with a Yuriko Wincon in there as well. We are playing Nullrod, we're playing Scroll Rack, Mox Amber, Mana Crypt. We are not playing Mox Diamond. We are playing Chromox though. Maybe the land count is just too low. So that's actually an argument. Maybe you just don't have the land ratio to make use of actually Mox Diamond. We're not playing Mystic Remora. We are playing Cover of Darkness instead. We're also not playing Rhystic Study. Let's look at some more lists. This has 60% win rate, 3 wins and 2 losses. I love this name. I only play it for the art, Doomsday. This is a very similar list, however, first thing first, we don't have a Thassa's Oracle unless I'm blind. No, we don't. We do, however, have a very big ninja package. Mistblade Shinobi, Mist Syndicate Naga, Changeling Outcast, more one Mem Knight as well as Ornithopter and Phyrexian Walker, and a bunch of various 1 CMC creatures to get Yuriko into play consistently turn 2. We are playing Doomsday, but once again we don't have Thassa's here, so this is just a big burn Yuriko Doomsday with Enter the Infinite. I did not see Emrakul or any super Shadow of yeah, it's the same creature as we saw before, but we have some really expensive stuff. Commandeer, Contagion, Curtain's Call, Deadly Rollick, Force of Negation, Force of Despair. Fierce Guardianship is kinda expensive. Dismember, Force of Will. We are playing Tainted Pact. You can actually play Tainted Pact even though you don't have Thassa's Oracle, because it's just a 2 mana, almost instant speed tutor. You have to stop somewhere down the line. We're playing Nullrod, we're playing Mox Diamond, Mox Amber, Lotus, Grafdigger's Case, Curse Totem, Chromox. We are not playing Sol Ring, and we are not playing Mana Crypt. We are playing Rhystic Study, but we're not playing Mystic Remora. We are playing Cover of Darkness like the other deck also did. And we're playing this aura that gives flying and +1/+1. When a ninja enters the battlefield under your control, you may return Smoke Shroud from your graveyard to the battlefield attached to that creature. That's actually kinda cool. And we're playing 26 lands. I hope this gave you a good picture of what kind of Yuriko deck people are bringing to tournaments, what cards have been performing quite good according to some statistics, and you got a form of inspiration on how to potentially build your own Yuriko deck. If you have any questions or feedback regarding this kind of video, feel free to leave those in the comments below and I will do my very best to answer those questions.